It started as a quiet assumption shared across briefing rooms and intelligence reports on both sides of the Iron Curtain. The F-5 was fast, yes. Agile, maybe. Cheap and simple, definitely. But dangerous? Not really. Soviet pilots, trained to respect American fighters like the F-4 Phantom and later the F-15, rarely lost sleep over the small Northrop jet. To them, the F-5 was a lightweight export fighter, something meant for allies, not for real air dominance. It was a plane you dismissed, not one you feared. That belief would hold steady for years, until one violent afternoon when a single F-5 pilot rewrote that assumption in the sky and sent shockwaves through Soviet air combat thinking. To understand why this moment mattered so much, you first need to understand the mindset of Soviet fighter pilots during the Cold War. From the late 1950s onward, Soviet aviation doctrine focused on speed, climb rate, and missile firepower. Aircraft like the MiG-21 were designed to rise fast, strike hard, and leave just as quickly. Dogfighting was considered secondary, almost outdated. Training emphasized strict ground control, precise instructions, and rigid formations. Pilots followed orders from controllers watching radar screens far away. Initiative was risky. Creativity was discouraged. Against that system, the F-5 seemed unimportant. It carried no powerful radar, no long-range missiles, and no imposing size. On paper, it was outmatched before the fight even began. The F-5 itself came from a very different idea. Designed by Northrop in the late 1950s, it was meant to be simple, reliable, and easy to maintain anywhere in the world. 2 small engines, a slim fuselage, excellent cockpit visibility, and clean aerodynamics. It did not rely on raw power. Instead, it rewarded pilots who understood angles, energy, and timing. It could turn tightly without bleeding speed, accelerate smoothly at low altitude, and blend into the ground when viewed from above. Still, none of this impressed Soviet planners. They judged aircraft by charts and specifications, and the F-5 rarely looked impressive on paper. By the mid-1960s, the Cold War had turned hot over Southeast Asia. The skies above Vietnam became one of the few places where American and Soviet-designed aircraft could meet in real combat, even if Soviet pilots officially stayed out of the fight. Soviet advisors watched closely. They studied every engagement, every loss, every mistake. Early on, North Vietnamese MiG pilots achieved surprising success, not because their aircraft were better, but because American pilots were unprepared for close-range air combat. Missiles failed. Radar confused more than it helped. Large formations became slow and predictable. These early results only strengthened Soviet confidence. Their aircraft, flown their way, seemed capable of standing up to Western technology. Then the Americans began to adapt. Painfully at first, they realized that advanced machines meant nothing without proper training. Pilots needed to understand the enemy, not just outfly him. From that realization came a quiet revolution in air combat training. One of the most important tools in that revolution was the F-5. In the late 1960s, the United States secretly obtained MiG-21s through foreign channels. To train against them, American pilots needed an aircraft that could realistically copy the MiG's size, speed, and limitations. The F-5 was nearly perfect for the role. It was small, quick to respond, and unforgiving to mistakes, just like the MiG-21. Elite pilots began flying F-5s as aggressors, learning Soviet-style tactics, and then finding ways to defeat them. What started as a training solution soon revealed a deeper truth. In skilled hands, the F-5 was not just pretending to be a MiG, it was dangerous on its own. The story of the 4-MiGs begins in this world of growing confidence, quiet rivalry, and dangerous testing of limits. This was not a staged exercise. It was not designed for headlines. It was a real encounter shaped by overconfidence on one side and sharp awareness on the other. Most accounts place the incident in the early 1970s, during a period of heightened air activity near contested airspace. The time was late afternoon, when the sun hung low, blinding pilots who failed to position themselves correctly. Light, shadow and speed would all matter in the minutes ahead. The F-5 pilot that day was not famous. He was not a test pilot or a senior officer. He was a captain with hundreds of hours in lightweight fighters and a reputation for staying calm when things went wrong. He believed close combat was still the heart of air warfare. He trusted his eyes more than his instruments and his instincts more than assumptions. When his warning systems hinted at multiple fast-moving contacts, he did not panic. He did not immediately turn away. He adjusted his throttle, checked his fuel state, and climbed just enough to keep the sun behind him. The MiGs approached with confidence. 4 aircraft, flying in loose coordination, expecting a simple intercept. From their point of view, the situation was clear. 1 small NATO fighter against 4 Soviet-built jets. They had numbers, altitude, and doctrine on their side. They assumed the F-5 would run or make a defensive break. What they did not expect was resistance. What they certainly did not expect was aggression. The first merge happened in seconds. The sky turned violent and fast. Vapor trails twisted, sunlight flashed across canopies. Instead of diving away, the F-5 pilot turned sharply into the formation, forcing a close, high-angle merge that erased the MiG's speed advantage. 1 MiG overshot badly. Another climbed too steeply. The remaining 2 hesitated, unsure who had the lead. That brief hesitation changed everything. The F-5 rolled hard and pulled into the nearest MiG, crossing his nose. There was no missile shot and no warning tone. Just a short, controlled burst from the cannon. The round struck cleanly. The MiG shuddered, began trailing smoke, and vanished downward into cloud. The entire exchange lasted only seconds. 1 MiG was gone before the others fully understood what had happened. Shock rippled through the formation. This was not the fight they had prepared for. Ground controllers began issuing rapid instructions, but the situation was already too chaotic. The MiGs tightened their turns to trap the F-5, but in doing so, they lost speed. The F-5, lighter and better balanced, kept its energy. The pilot used vertical movement carefully, not to escape, but to force mistakes. The second MiG fell during a tightening spiral. Its pilot pulled harder and harder, trying to stay inside the F-5's turn. The aircraft began to shudder as lift faded. The F-5 pilot anticipated the stall before it fully developed. He rolled out early, lined up the shot, and fired as the MiG struggled to recover. Another short burst, another aircraft lost. By now, the sky was confusion. Radio calls overlapped. Commands conflicted. The 2 remaining MiGs split apart, hoping to attack from opposite angles. Instead of surrounding the F-5, they isolated themselves. The F-5 pilot recognized the mistake instantly. He turned toward the nearer threat. The third kill came head-on. Both pilots saw each other at the same time. Both fired. At the last second, the F-5 pilot broke low and slightly sideways, letting enemy fire pass overhead. As he crossed beneath the MiG's nose, he fired upward. The MiG erupted in flame, its engine torn apart. The sky suddenly felt empty. The final MiG tried to escape. Full throttle, shallow dive, straight line. On paper, the MiG was faster. In reality, it had already lost too much speed and altitude in earlier turns. The F-5 followed patiently, conserving fuel, staying just close enough. When the MiG leveled out to avoid terrain, the F-5 closed the distance. One last firing solution, one final burst. The 4th MiG fell, away, ending the fight. When the sky finally went quiet, the impact of what had happened began to sink in. This was not luck. This was not chance. This was training, awareness, and understanding applied perfectly under pressure. Reports moved quickly through intelligence channels, stripped of emotion, but heavy with meaning. Soviet analysts replayed the engagement again and again. They searched for excuses: poor coordination, bad decisions, pilot error. Yet none of those explanations erased the core truth. A fighter they had dismissed had just destroyed 4 MiGs in a single engagement. One pilot had defeated numbers, doctrine, and expectations. From that moment forward, the F-5 was no longer ignored. It became studied, quietly respected. In some circles, feared. Changes followed. Soviet training placed renewed focus on close combat. Dogfighting returned to importance. The idea that pilots needed greater independence began to surface, even if reluctantly. The engagement exposed our weakness in rigid systems. It showed that air combat was still deeply human, shaped by judgment, timing, and courage. For Western air forces, the lesson was equally powerful. The F-5 proved that a well-designed, simple aircraft could be deadly when matched with proper training. It influenced how future fighters were evaluated. Agility, visibility, and pilot workload gained new importance. The myth that bigger and faster always meant better began to crack. For pilots who heard the story later, passed quietly from briefing room to briefing room, the lesson was unforgettable. Never underestimate the aircraft in front of you. Never assume the fight will follow the plan. And never forget that in the sky, one calm, well-trained pilot can change everything in less than a minute. That single fight did not start a war, but it changed how wars in the air would be fought. It reshaped training, challenged doctrine, and reminded both sides of an old truth that technology alone can never replace: skill. The F-5 was no longer just a lightweight export fighter. For those who understood what really happened that day, it became a symbol of something far more dangerous. It was proof that fear in air combat does not come from size or reputation. It comes from uncertainty. And after one F-5 shot down 4 MiGs in a single fight, uncertainty entered the minds of pilots who had once believed they had nothing to fear at all. If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.